The battlefield was quiet now, the kind of silence that pressed heavy on the ears after hours of chaos. Smoke curled lazily into the gray sky, mixing with the faint smell of burned metal and scorched earth. Lieutenant Jack Dawson moved carefully, through the wreckage, his boots crunching over shards of alien alloy scattered across the ground. His rifle hung loosely from his shoulder, but his grip on it was firm, ready for anything. He wasn't sure what he was looking for anymore. The mission had been clear: secure the outpost, gather intel, and retreat. But something about this place felt wrong. It wasn't just the eerie stillness or the unnatural glow of the alien structures around him. There was a weight in the air, like the remnants of a decision made here, something final and irreversible. Then he heard it, a sound so soft it could have been mistaken for the wind. A whimper. Faint, trembling, almost human. Jack froze, his hand instinctively tightening on his weapon. He scanned the area, his eyes narrowing as they adjusted to the dim light filtering through cracks in the damaged walls. The sound came again, louder this time, pulling him toward a collapsed section of the building. Carefully, he stepped over. Debris, his movements slow and deliberate. There, beneath a jagged piece of metal, was a small figure. At first glance, it didn't look human. Its skin shimmered faintly, catching the weak light in ways no natural surface should. Large, luminous eyes blinked up at him, wide with fear. Thin limbs twitched nervously, and its body seemed too delicate to belong to any fighter. Around its neck hung a pendant, glowing faintly with symbols Jack couldn't understand. For a moment, Jack just stared. This wasn't part of the plan. He'd expected weapons caches, data cores, maybe even enemy combatants hiding in the shadows. It's not this childlike creature, abandoned and scared. It's okay, Jack said finally, his voice calm despite the storm inside him. I'm not going to hurt you. The creature flinched at the sound of his voice, pressing itself further into the corner. But it didn't run. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, studying him with an intensity that caught Jack off guard. Those eyes, they weren't just frightened. They were intelligent, full of questions and emotions far deeper than he would have expected from something so young. Kneeling down, Jack set his rifle aside and held out his hands, palms open to show he meant no harm. You're safe now, he continued, keeping his tone steady. I won't let anyone hurt you. Slowly, the creature relaxed, though its gaze never left his face. Jack noticed scratches on its arms and dirt smudged across its glowing skin. Whoever or whatever it was, it had been through hell, and judging by the state of the outpost, Jack doubted anyone else was coming back for it. Reaching forward cautiously, Jack slipped one arm under the creature's legs and the other behind its back, lifting it gently. It tensed at first, then settled against him, its tiny frame trembling. Wrapping it in his jacket, Jack stood and began making his way back toward the extraction point. As he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stumbled onto something bigger than himself. This wasn't just some stray alien. It was a child left behind while its people fled. Why? What had happened here? And why abandon one of their own? Questions swirled in Jack's mind, but there was no time to dwell on them. The rest of his team was waiting, and they wouldn't take kindly to delays. Still, every step he took felt heavier than the last, not because of the added weight in his arms, but because of the choice he knew he'd have to make. By the time he reached the rendezvous point, the others were already loading supplies onto the transport shuttle. Corporal Ryan spotted him first, his brow furrowing as he took in the sight of the glowing bundle in Jack's arms. "What the hell is that?" Ryan asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. Jack ignored him, heading straight for the medic. "Get me a blanket," he ordered, laying the creature down on a makeshift cot. "And check for injuries." The medic hesitated but obeyed, wrapping the creature in a thick wool blanket. As she worked, the others gathered around, muttering among themselves. "You can't seriously be thinking of bringing that thing with us," someone said. Jack didn't bother turning to see who it was. He already knew what they were thinking, same doubts running through his own head. "We don't leave survivors behind," Jack replied firmly, meeting each skeptical gaze. "That includes civilians or kids." No one argued further, though the tension in the air was palpable. By the time they boarded the shuttle, the creature had fallen asleep, its breathing slow and even. Jack sat beside it, watching its chest rise and fall, marveling at how peaceful it looked despite everything it had endured. During the long ride back to base, Jack found himself thinking about home. He thought about his sister's kids running wild in her backyard, laughing without a care in the world. He thought about the empty apartment waiting for him, devoid of family or warmth. Maybe that's why he felt such a pull toward this strange, little being. It reminded him of what he'd lost and what he could still gain. When they landed, the debriefing was predictably chaotic. Command wanted answers. What was it? Where did it come from? Was it dangerous? Jack answered as best he could, sticking to the facts, but when they suggested handing it over to scientists for testing, he drew the line. She stays with me, he insisted, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. She's been through enough already. After some debate and a few heated arguments, they agreed, albeit reluctantly. For now, the creature would remain under Jack's care. Whatever she was, wherever she came from, she was his responsibility now. That night, as the base grew quiet, Jack sat alone in his quarters, staring at the sleeping form curled up on his cot. She looked so small, so fragile, yet there was a strength in her presence that defied explanation. He didn't know much about her yet, but one thing was certain: she deserved better than to be abandoned. Leaning back in his chair, Jack sighed deeply. This wasn't going to be easy. Raising a child, especially one like her, would come with challenges he couldn't even imagine. But as he watched her sleep, he realized something important. No matter where she came from or what she was here now, and as long as she needed him, he'd be there for her. Back on Earth, life moved quickly, but for Jack Dawson, it felt like every day brought a new challenge. The alien child, he had started calling her Lyra, was adjusting to her surroundings faster than he expected. She learned words by watching him speak, mimicking sounds until they formed sentences. Her large, glowing eyes followed everything with curiosity, soaking in the world around her like a sponge. Jack tried his best to make things normal. He bought clothes that fit her small frame, though they always looked a little too big. He cooked meals, even though she didn't seem to eat much. At night, he read stories aloud, hoping the rhythm of his voice would comfort her. Sometimes she smiled, a rare fleeting expression that made his chest tighten with pride. Other times she stared out the window, her face unreadable, as if searching for something far away. But the outside world wasn't as welcoming. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors when they saw her walking beside Jack. Some avoided eye contact altogether, while others crossed the street to keep their distance. A few brave souls approached Jack directly, asking questions he didn't want to answer. "What is she?" one man demanded, his tone sharp and accusing. "Is she dangerous?" "She's just a kid," Jack replied, his voice firm. "Same as any other." That didn't stop the rumors from spreading. People talked about strange lights coming from his apartment at night or odd noises echoing through the halls. None of it was true, but Jack knew how fear worked. It twisted facts into fiction, turning harmless moments into threats. Schools refused to enroll Lyra, citing safety concerns. Jack fought back, arguing that she deserved the same opportunities as anyone else. He spent hours filling out forms, attending meetings, and pleading his case. But no matter how hard he pushed, the doors stayed closed. Frustrated but unwilling to give up, he decided to teach her himself. Every morning, they sat together at the kitchen table, books spread out between them. Math came easily to Lyra. She solved problems in her head faster than Jack could write them down. Science fascinated her, especially topics about space and stars. History, however, confused her. Wars, conquests, and human greed were concepts she struggled to understand. "Why do people fight?" she asked one day, tilting her head as she often did when puzzled. "Isn't there enough for everyone?" Jack hesitated, unsure how to explain centuries of conflict in simple terms. "Sometimes people get scared," he said finally, And when they're scared, they forget how to share. Lyra frowned, clearly unsatisfied with the answer, but she didn't press further. Instead, she turned her attention back to the textbook, flipping pages with careful precision. Despite the challenges, there were moments of joy. Lyra loved music, though she had never heard it before coming to Earth. One evening, Jack played an old record on his stereo, the crackling notes of a piano filling the room. Lyra froze mid-step, her head tilted toward the sound. Slowly, she began to sway, her movements clumsy but earnest. By the end of the song, she was spinning in circles, laughing softly. Jack joined in, dancing awkwardly to make her laugh harder. For those few minutes, the weight of the world lifted. They weren't soldier and alien, human and outsider. They were simply father and daughter, sharing a moment of pure happiness. But not all moments were so light. Late at night, when the apartment grew quiet, Lyra would sit by the window, staring at the sky. Jack noticed the sadness in her eyes, the way her fingers traced patterns on the glass as if trying to connect with something beyond reach. When he asked what she was thinking about, she shook her head, unwilling or unable to put it into words. One rainy afternoon, she finally spoke. "Do you think they'll come back?" she asked softly, her gaze fixed on the raindrops sliding down the pane. Jack knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I don't know," he admitted. "But even if they don't, you're not alone. You've got me." Lyra turned to look at him, her luminous eyes searching his face. "Why? Did you take me?" The question caught him off guard. He hadn't prepared for it, hadn't thought about how to explain his decision in a way she'd understand. "Because you needed help," he said after a pause, "and because I believe everyone deserves a chance to be happy." She studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly, as if deciding whether or not to trust his answer. Then she leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. Jack wrapped an arm around her, holding her close as the rain continued to fall. As weeks turned into months, Lyra grew more confident. She ventured outside more often, exploring the city with wide-eyed wonder. She marveled at cars speeding past, at birds flying overhead, at children playing in parks. Each discovery brought new questions which Jack answered as patiently as he could. Sometimes he didn't know the answers, but Lyra didn't seem to mind. She seemed content, just having someone to ask, yet despite her progress there were reminders of how different she was. Her skin still glowed faintly in the dark, and her eyes reflected light in ways that drew stares. Strangers sometimes pointed or whispered, making Jack's jaw tighten with anger. He wanted to shield her from the cruelty of the world, but he knew he couldn't protect her forever. One particularly bad day, a group of teenagers shouted insults as they passed Lyra on the street. She froze, confusion written across her face. Jack stepped forward, positioning himself between her and the taunts. "Keep walking," he told her firmly, guiding her away. Once they were safe inside the apartment, he saw tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, kneeling to meet her gaze. "Not everyone understands yet, but they will. And until then, we stick together." Lyra nodded, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. "Together," she repeated softly, clutching the pendant around her neck. That night, Jack lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the road ahead, the battles they'd face, not just against prejudice, but within themselves. Fighting Lyra wasn't going to be easy, but he didn't regret his choice. She had changed him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. Before her, his life had been empty, filled with missions and routines that left little room for meaning. Now every day felt purposeful, even if it was hard. He glanced over at her sleeping form, curled up under the blanket he'd bought for her. Her breathing was steady, her expression peaceful. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Jack knew one thing, for certain. He would do whatever it took to give her the life she deserved. When Lyra turned 12, strange things began happening around the apartment. At first, Jack thought it was his imagination. Objects would shift slightly on shelves, as if nudged by an invisible hand. Lights flickered at odd times, even when No one was near the switches. Once a glass of water floated across the kitchen table before settling down with barely a ripple. Jack tried to ignore it, chalking it up to stress or fatigue. But when Lyra woke one night, her hands glowing faintly and patterns swirling beneath her skin, he knew something bigger was going on. She sat upright in bed, staring at her palms with wide eyes, her breathing quick and shallow. "Lyra?" Jack whispered, stepping closer. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond right away, too focused on the glowing lines spreading over her, fingers like veins of liquid light. When she finally looked up, her expression was a mix of fear and awe. "What's happening to me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Jack admitted, sitting beside her. He reached out cautiously, placing a hand on her shoulder. "But we'll figure it out together." The next morning, Jack called Dr. Emily Grant, a scientist, who specialized in xenobiology. She had helped them once before years ago when Lyra first arrived. Though skeptical at first, she agreed to meet them after hearing about the recent events. In her lab, surrounded by humming machines and stacks of research papers, Dr. Grant examined Lyra carefully. She ran tests, took samples, and studied the glowing patterns on Lyra's skin. For hours, Jack waited outside, pacing back and forth while trying to ignore the knot of worry tightening in his stomach. Finally, Dr. Grant emerged, her face unreadable. "It's remarkable," she said, leading Jack into the observation room where Lyra sat quietly. "Her abilities are tied to her species' advanced technology. They're latent until adolescence, triggered by emotional growth and mental development." "What does that mean?" Jack asked, glancing at Lyra, who watched them with quiet curiosity. "It means she's coming into her own," Dr. Grant explained. "These powers are part of her heritage, but they're also dangerous if not controlled properly. Without guidance, she could harm herself, or others." Jack frowned, his protective instincts kicking in. "Can you help her control them, Doctor?" Grant hesitated, then nodded. "I can try, but there's more." She held up the pendant Lyra always wore, its surface now glowing brighter than ever. "This contains encrypted data. It's a map, a set of coordinates pointing to her homeworld." The news hit Jack like a punch to the chest. He had known Lyra came from somewhere else, but the idea of her returning to her people felt surreal. Would they accept her? Or would they reject her again? Lyra listened silently, her expression unreadable. When Dr. Grant finished speaking, she turned to Jack. "Do you think they'll want me back?" she asked softly. Jack knelt in front of her, meeting her gaze. "We won't know unless we go," he said firmly. "But I promise you this. Whatever happens, I'll be right there with you." Over the next few weeks, preparations for the journey consumed their lives. Dr. Grant secured passage aboard a research vessel bound for the coordinates encoded in the pendant. Supplies were gathered, plans were made, and countless questions swirled in Jack's mind. What would they find when they reached her homeworld? Would Lyra finally get the answers she had been searching for all these years? As the departure date approached, Lyra grew quieter. She spent hours staring at the pendant, tracing its symbols with her fingertips. One evening, as they packed the last of their belongings, she spoke. "What if they don't like me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "They will," Jack replied without hesitation. "Because you're amazing, and anyone who doesn't see that isn't worth worrying about." Lyra smiled faintly, though doubt lingered in her eyes. Jack wished he could erase her fears, but he knew some battles had to be fought alone. All he could do was stand by her side and offer support. The day of the launch arrived sooner than either of them expected. Standing on the platform overlooking the sleek spacecraft, Jack felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Excitement, fear, hope. They all tangled together, making it hard to focus. Beside him, Lyra clutched her pendant tightly, her glowing eyes fixed on the horizon. "This is it," Jack said, turning to her. "Ready?" She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. Together they boarded the ship, leaving behind the only home Lyra had ever known, As the engines roared to life and the craft lifted off, Jack glanced out the window at the shrinking blue planet below. Earth faded into the distance, replaced by endless stars. The voyage took months, during which father and daughter grew closer than ever. They trained together, practicing techniques to help Lyra control her powers. They talked late into the night, discussing everything from human history to alien customs. Slowly, Lyra began to open up about her fears and hopes, sharing pieces of herself she had kept hidden for years. One evening, as they floated weightlessly in the ship's observation deck, Lyra asked the question that had haunted her since childhood. "Why did they leave me behind?" Jack sighed, pulling himself closer so they were face to face. "I don't know why they did it," he admitted. "But I do know this. They missed out. You're strong, smart, and brave. Everything anyone could hope for. Don't let them make you feel less than you are." Tears welled up in Lyra's eyes, but she blinked them away, nodding resolutely. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." As the ship drew closer to their destination, anticipation built. Finally, one morning, the crew announced they had reached the coordinates. Through the viewport, a breathtaking planet came into view. Crystal towers sparkled under twin suns, and rivers of light flowed across the landscape like living energy. "It's beautiful," Lyra murmured, her voice filled with wonder. "It sure is," Jack agreed, squeezing her hand. "Let's go see what's waiting for us." When they landed, a delegation of aliens greeted them, their forms tall and elegant, their skin shimmering like liquid metal. They spoke in melodic tones, their language flowing like music. Through translators, they communicated with Jack and Lyra, asking questions about their journey and purpose. At first, the elders seemed intrigued by Lyra, examining her with detached curiosity. But when they learned of her upbringing among humans, their expressions shifted to disdain. "She is imperfect," one elder declared coldly. "Her connection to your kind has tainted her." Anger flared in Jack's chest, but before he could respond, Lyra stepped forward. Her voice was steady, though her hands still trembled. "I may not be like you," she said, her words translated for the crowd, "but I am not imperfect. I have learned strength, compassion, and courage from my father. If being different makes me flawed, then I choose to embrace it." The elders stared at her, stunned by her defiance. Then, without warning, Lyra raised her hands and the air around her shimmered with energy. Patterns of light danced across her skin, forming intricate designs that pulsed with power. The ground beneath their feet vibrated, and the crystal towers resonated with a deep, harmonious hum. For a moment, everyone was silent. Then, one by one, the elders bowed their heads, acknowledging her display of unity between two worlds. Though reluctant, they agreed to establish limited contact with Earth, recognizing Lyra as a bridge between their species and humanity. As they prepared to leave, Lyra turned to Jack, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said, "for showing me who I am." Jack hugged her tightly, his throat tight with emotion. "You've always been extraordinary," he told her. "Never forget that." Though their journey was far from over, Jack knew one thing for certain: no matter where life took them, they would face it together. The journey back to Earth was quieter than the trip to Lyra's homeworld. The ship hummed softly as it sailed through the vast emptiness of space, and the weight of what had happened hung heavy in the air. Lyra spent most of her time staring out the viewport, watching the stars streak past in streaks of white and gold. Her hands rested on the pendant around her neck, its glow dimmer now but still steady like a heartbeat. Jack watched her from across the room, his brow furrowed with concern. He could see the thoughts swirling behind her luminous eyes, the mix of relief and sadness that came with finally meeting her people and being rejected again. Though the elders had acknowledged her powers, they hadn't welcomed her back. Instead, they dismissed her as an outsider, someone who no longer belonged. "They didn't understand you," Jack said one evening, breaking the silence. "But that doesn't mean you're any less." Lyra turned to him, her expression softening. "I know," she replied, "but it still hurts." Jack crossed the room and sat beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. You showed them something important, he reminded her. You proved that being different isn't wrong, it's powerful. She nodded slowly, though her gaze drifted back to the stars. Do you think I'll ever truly belong somewhere? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. With humans or with them? Jack hesitated, unsure how to answer. The truth was he didn't know, but he couldn't let her doubt herself. You already belong, he said firmly, with me. And anyone else who sees how amazing you are. Lyra smiled faintly, leaning into his side. For a moment, the loneliness seemed to lift, replaced by the warmth of their bond. They sat like that for a long time, father and daughter, united by love and shared experiences. When they returned to Earth, life began to change in unexpected ways. News of Lyra's encounter with her species spread quickly, thanks to Dr. Grant's report to the government. At first, people were skeptical, even fearful, but as more details emerged about her powers, her bravery, and the tentative agreement for interstellar cooperation, public opinion began to shift. Scientists and diplomats flocked to meet Lyra, eager to learn from her. She became a symbol of hope, proof that humans and aliens could coexist. Yet despite the attention, Lyra remained grounded. She avoided the spotlight whenever possible, preferring quiet moments with Jack over interviews and speeches. Still, there were challenges. Adjusting to her new role wasn't easy. Some days she felt like a bridge between two worlds, carrying the weight of expectations on her shoulders. Other days she felt torn, unsure where she truly fit. Jack did everything he could to support her, reminding her that she didn't have to have all the answers right away. One afternoon, as they walked through a park near their apartment, Lyra stopped suddenly, staring at a group of children playing tag. Their laughter echoed through the trees, bright and carefree. Do you think they'd accept me? She asked quietly. Jack followed her gaze, watching the kids chase each other with wide grins. They might not understand you at first, he admitted, but they'll see how kind you are. How special? Lyra sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. Sometimes I wish I could just be normal. You are normal, Jack insisted, kneeling to meet her eye level. Just because you're different doesn't mean you're less. You're more. And anyone who can't see that isn't worth your time. She managed a small smile, though doubt lingered in her eyes. Thanks, Dad. As weeks turned into months, Lyra found ways to connect with others. She started visiting schools, sharing stories about her journey and answering questions from curious students. At first, she was nervous, afraid of being judged. But the children's enthusiasm won her over. They marveled at her glowing skin and asked endless questions about her powers, treating her like a hero rather than an outsider. Through these interactions, Lyra began to find her place. She realized she didn't need to choose between being human or alien. She could be both. Her unique perspective allowed her to see connections others missed, bridging gaps between cultures and ideas. Slowly, she embraced her identity, finding strength in her differences. Despite her progress, there were reminders of how far the world still had to go. Not everyone welcomed her presence. Protesters gathered outside events where she spoke, holding signs that read, "Keep Earth human," and shouting insults. Jack wanted to shield her from the negativity, but Lyra refused to hide. They're scared, she told him one evening after a particularly heated protest. Scared of change, of things they don't understand. And what do you feel? Jack asked, studying her face. Sad, she admitted, but also determined. I want to show them that fear doesn't have to divide us. We can learn from each other instead. Her words filled Jack with pride. She was growing into someone remarkable, someone who could inspire others to look beyond prejudice and embrace unity. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew Lyra was strong enough to handle it. Months later, Lyra stood on a stage in front of hundreds of people, her glowing form illuminated by spotlights. It was a ceremony to celebrate the first official exchange program between Earth and her homeworld. Scientists, artists, and diplomats would travel back and forth, learning from each other and building trust. As she addressed the crowd, Her voice, steady and clear, Jack watched from the sidelines, his heart swelling with pride. She spoke of hope, of understanding, of the importance of reaching across divides. When she finished, the audience erupted into applause, many rising to their feet. Afterward, as reporters swarmed her for interviews, Jack slipped away, giving her space to shine. He wandered through the halls of the convention center, reflecting on how far they'd come. From the day he found her on that battlefield to this moment, their journey had been filled with challenges and triumphs. And though their lives would never be simple, he wouldn't trade a single moment. Later that night, back at their apartment, Lyra joined him on the couch, her face glowing with excitement. "Did you see their faces?" she asked, laughing softly. "They actually listened." "I'm not surprised," Jack replied, smiling. "You've always had a way of making people listen." She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "You've been my anchor this whole time." Jack wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "And you've been my guide," he said. "You've taught me so much about courage and resilience." For a while they sat in comfortable silence, enjoying the quiet after the chaos of the day. Then Lyra spoke again, her tone thoughtful. "What happens next?" Jack shrugged, glancing at the window where city lights twinkled in the distance. "Whatever we make of it," he said, "the future's wide open." Lyra smiled, her eyes reflecting the same sense of possibility. Together, they looked toward the horizon, ready to face whatever came next. Years passed, and the world changed in ways no one could have predicted. The exchange program between Earth and Lyra's homeworld grew stronger, paving the way for collaboration in science, art, and culture. Humans and aliens worked side by side, learning from each other and finding common ground. It wasn't always easy. There were misunderstandings, disagreements, and moments of tension, but progress was undeniable. For Lyra, life became a delicate balance. She divided her time between Earth and her homeworld, serving as an ambassador for both sides. Her glowing presence commanded respect, not just because of her powers, but because of the wisdom she carried within her. She had seen rejection and acceptance, fear and hope, division and unity. These experiences shaped her into someone who understood the complexities of belonging. Jack watched her grow into her role with pride. Though their time together became less frequent, their bond remained unshakable. Whenever Lyra returned to Earth, they spent hours catching up, sharing stories about their lives. Jack told her about his adventures traveling the globe, meeting people inspired by her story. Lyra spoke of her work on her homeworld, teaching others to embrace diversity and curiosity. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their apartment, the city lights twinkling below, Lyra turned to Jack with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found me that day?" she asked. Jack leaned back in his chair, considering the question. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I think about it differently now. I don't wonder what would have happened. I think about how lucky I am that I did find you." Lyra smiled, her luminous eyes reflecting the soft glow of the moonlight. "I feel the same way," she said softly. "You gave me a family when I didn't have one. You showed me what it means to belong." Jack reached over, placing a hand on hers. "You've done more than I ever imagined," he said. "You've changed the world, Lyra, not just for humans or your people, but for everyone." She shook her head modestly, though her cheeks flushed with pride. "I didn't do it alone," she replied. "You've been with me every step of the way." Their conversation drifted into silence, the kind that comes from years of shared understanding. They didn't need words to fill the space between them. Their presence alone was enough. As the years went on, Jack began to slow down. His hair turned gray, and his steps became slower, but his spirit remained strong. Lyra noticed the changes, of course, and it filled her with a quiet ache. She knew their time together was limited, but she refused to dwell on it. Instead, she focused on making every moment count. On Jack's 70th birthday, Lyra organized a surprise party at their apartment. Friends, family, and colleagues gathered to celebrate the man who had touched so many lives. There were speeches, laughter, and plenty of cake. When it was Lyra's turn to speak, she stood before the crowd, her glowing form drawing all eyes. "Most of you know my story," she began, her voice steady. "How I was found on a battlefield, scared and alone. But what you might not realize is how much one person can change everything. Jack didn't just save me, he believed in me. He taught me to be brave, to stand up for myself, and to never stop reaching for something better." Her gaze shifted to Jack, who sat smiling at her from the couch. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice breaking slightly. "For being my father, for showing me what love looks like." The room erupted into applause, but Jack barely heard it. His eyes were fixed on Lyra, tears glistening in the corners. He had given her a home, but she had given him purpose. Together they had created something extraordinary. Eventually the inevitable arrived. Jack's health declined, and he spent more time resting than exploring. Lyra stayed by his side, reading to him, sharing memories, and holding his hand. As the days grew shorter, on a quiet afternoon, surrounded by sunlight streaming through the window, Jack passed away peacefully. Lyra mourned deeply, retreating to the solitude of her homeworld for a time. She wandered among the crystal towers, letting the hum of energy soothe her grief. Yet even in her sadness, she felt Jack's presence. His lessons lived on in her, guiding her choices and shaping her actions. When she returned to Earth, she brought with her a gift, a memorial crafted from the same shimmering material as the towers on her homeworld. It stood tall in the center of a park, its surface etched with symbols from both cultures. At its base was an inscription: "To those who believe in the power of connection." People came from all over to see it, leaving flowers and messages of gratitude. Lyra visited often, sitting quietly beneath its shadow. She could almost hear Jack's voice in the rustling leaves, reminding her to keep moving forward. Decades later, Lyra stood on a hill overlooking the city. The skyline had changed, taller buildings replacing older ones, but the heart of the place remained the same. Children played in the streets, their laughter echoing through the air. Among them were beings from her homeworld, their forms blending seamlessly with the human crowd. She had spent her life building bridges, proving that differences didn't have to divide. Now, as she looked out at the world she had helped shape, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Jack's legacy lived on, not just in her, but in everyone who dared to reach across divides. A breeze swept past, carrying with it the faint scent of blooming flowers. Lyra closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her. She wasn't alone. Jack was with her in every memory, every lesson, every act of kindness she inspired. Opening her eyes, she smiled softly. The future stretched out before her, full of possibilities. And though she carried the weight of loss, she also carried love, the kind that transcended lifetimes and connected worlds. With one last glance at the city, Lyra turned and walked away, her glowing form fading into the distance. Somewhere, Jack was watching, proud of the woman she had become. Together they had shown the universe that belonging wasn't about where you came from, it was about who stood beside you.